Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday, depending on where you're joining us from today. I am Kyler Cheatham. As you can clearly see, Adam is not with me this morning. He was pulled into some of our clients' needs, which is the reason why we're actually doing this live today to talk about the importance of your implementation network. We're a part of this implementation network for this client. So he is going to do that today. So it's just me, but I have got a full packed agenda for us to cover through. But more important, this is an Ask Me Anything session. So it's really up to you of what we talk about. And anything that you want to know about when it comes to heavy industry, software solutions, implementation, system architecture, that's really my wheelhouse. Happy to talk about other things like change management, leadership. But here at the Confluential, we really specialized in heavy industry and business systems that support specialized metals and complex industries. So if you haven't been here before, I'm so excited to have you. We are live on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So I encourage you to drop where you're joining us from in the chat here. So I can just see kind of what our audience looks like today. And we're excited to kind of get into this conversation with you. So let's get into it. So, what is an implementation network? And I have my little outline over here, so we stay on track. But the implementation network, and the reason why we call it that is because a lot of times when we see software failures, it's mostly because people misunderstand the roles of them, and that could be anything from a SaaS implementation failure that is business unit based. So we're looking at a finance system or a supply chain system, a warehouse management system, to an enterprise level technology, everything down to even AI agents, right? A lot of times, what we see is businesses don't do these every day, right? Nor should they. They cost a lot, it's a lot of work, stakes are high, and they don't understand all of the different roles that goes into your implementation network. So I'm really going to drill down into those today. So thank you for tuning in from Arizona and then from Colorado. I see you guys this morning, which is where we are based in the western slope of Colorado. So we're definitely excited to have you guys today. So the hidden reality of those implementations is really they fail when we don't understand everyone's responsibility. So let's go into our first role, which is the vendor, right? And a lot of times I call this the builder role because a lot of integrations are going to happen with different vendors. And that's something to really keep into consideration as well. But the seller builder role is going to be the person that you're buying the software from. This could be a verified reseller, right, of the software. It could be the actual software solution itself. So you bought Epicor from Epicor, right? Or it could be a system integrator that both sells you the software and implements it, right? So this process is one where there's many different tripping points of where you can go wrong. So before we bring in any vendor to this conversation, we need to understand that we know our requirements. And that all starts with the internal alignment. I'll talk about the internal teams as well and the responsibilities after we get to the vendor. But I want to be so clear, if this is the only part that you listen to of this live, that you need to know with what you want before you go to any vendor. The vendor's job is to sell you software. Hard stop. Period. Right? Their job is to sell you the most that they can possibly sell you from any software package. That's how these salespeople get paid, right? They reach quotas, and that's their compensation structure. Does that mean that they're horrible people? Absolutely not, right? We have a lot of very talented, I would argue the most talented salespeople go into tech and software sales because one, it's the most lucrative, and two, it is definitely something that takes nuance. So they're not responsible for what you buy. They're not responsible for your internal alignment. And then those sales promises versus contract reality is going to be a huge piece of this. If your requirements are unclear, the software implementation is going to reflect that confusion, and it's going to be an absolute disaster dumpster fire of an implementation because it's starting on a weak foundation. You cannot build a house on sand. Well, you can, right? But it's likely going to fall down when the wind blows, right? Over there. So that's going to be uh, a big piece of that. So I love this question of why are requirements so important? So think about any sort of it's my son's birthday today. He's 7. We built him a new desk for his room. Imagine if we did not have the manual to build that desk. Could we know the shape of the desk, the function of the desk, pretty much? Yeah, but we don't know where all the nuanced parts of this specific desk goes all together. The requirements are going to be the guiding principle, and they're not something that you can do with a software vendor because they will influence and bias those. Same with a system integrator. What are your requirements? What are your pain points? And how do you address those within those conversations? Requirements are critically important. They cannot be written by ChatGPT. Sure, go in and have a conversation with Chat, right? About what you're dealing with, and it can start to point you in the right directions. But a requirements is a disciplined process to get all of those from the end user, not what the executives say that they want, but what does the problem and the end user of the organization actually need. So that's such a great question, and definitely something that requires practice. If you have questions about your requirements in general, definitely feel free to hit me up in my DMs, and I can, better advise. Each requirements are as unique as a person, human's DNA, right? They should be unique to your business. They should be unique to what your value proposition is as a company. So that's a big piece of that. So definitely great question there. So let's go into internal responsibilities. And this is a part that's hard and tricky because, again, you don't do software implementations, especially large enterprise level software implementations, every single day, right? And this is where most things go sideways. The vendor, we can work through those contracts. Likely the software is going to fit for the most part, but it's all going to depend if you have the internal structure to implement those. As I always say, you are responsible for the software that you buy. Should a vendor lie to you or make up fake demos? Absolutely not, right? But you have to be ready to have those conversations as a business. So let's talk about your internal implementation network, which is so important here. Let me turn off my do not disturb on here. We're getting a lot of birthday text messages from my son. So we've got on our internal network, we've got the steering committee, right? Which is just that, right? They steered the decision making at a high level of an implementation. We have the core team, which is core responsibility is implementing that. Again, that is going to be the heartbeat of the implementation is your core team. Then we have the project sponsor. Some people call this the executive sponsor. This is the role of leadership in this type of implementation. They're in charge of making sure that the board knows what's going on, that the rest of the C-suite knows what's going on. Then we have the project manager. Again, that's going to be the person that really leads this entire project. If you are doing an ERP system or a larger enterprise level system, this person needs to have experience directly with an ERP implementation, ideally with that same system, especially if it's a specialized system or a larger, very focused system like SAP S/4HANA. If you don't have a project manager that's focused in that, you can still have a very talented PM, but you're going to need external help. You just are. That's just how that works. Project management is going to be the biggest discipline that you're going to need in this type of project. So you want to pick your A team for that. And then we have our subject matter experts, our end users, and all of those different people. We're going to want to have those people in the room when we're designing the integration of these types of systems. So many times we see all of these, beautiful custom integrations built, and then the end user being like, we don't actually need that. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than that type of conversation, right? So that's a big piece of that. If you're doing a smaller implementation, maybe a more of an MES system, warehouse management system, quality management system, that project manager would ideally still have that type of experience. Let's see. This is a good question here. Thank you guys for the questions. I always appreciate that. How do you bring alignment across teams? I see alignment being an issue even before the implementation. Absolutely. So that alignment on like what are the strategic goals of this new software that we're buying should be in those requirements. Like, right, that should be what births the requirements. So you're going to need alignment way before that. And the steering committee's job is to keep that alignment from each place that they come from. Someone's from finance, someone's from production, someone's from sales and marketing, someone's from all the different areas of the organization. That team is in charge of making sure that their parties, their connected departments are still aligned around that. Then we have the executive sponsor, or the project sponsor that's going to make sure that the executive team doesn't do anything weird, like be like, why are we doing this again? Or what's the point of this project? Because they forgot they signed off on it a year ago. And now they're starting to hear whispers throughout the organization that the implementation is taking too long. The functions aren't working right. And so now they're starting to question why we're doing this. That's the executive sponsor's job to say, well, we never said that this was going to be easy. This is a massive system. Of course, we're going to hit roadblocks, and here's what we're doing to address X, Y, and Z, right? Alignment is critical. I always say, if you don't have alignment, you don't have an implementation. That doesn't mean it needs to be perfect every single day, but it certainly needs to be noticed at each status meeting. This is what we're trying to achieve. That's how the requirements are built. If you don't have alignment, a software vendor will pick up on that immediately, especially the bigger system integrators, and they'll try and sell you things like management services or accounting services because they're like, they have a need for that. And maybe you do. Maybe that's a great fit for you. Great. If it is, though, you have to remember that when we get to the system integrators, we'll talk about that. That's going to be an option for you to get taken advantage of in this process. So definitely a great question. So let's see. Let's see if we got any more in here. What decisions should never be outsourced, even working with a strong implementation partner? Excellent question, right? So the outsource should never be the why, right? Why are we doing this? Why do we need to service our community, whether it be our employees, our customers? And then also the project management. You can have an outside project manager that's helping you keep all of this going, but you need an internal PM that's only focused on this, right? So that they have the ability to come back to the organization, make sure everything is on track. And that needs to be internal oversight, internal governance, because if you don't have that, we see I just did that case study on the Zimmer Deloitte, right? Implementation failure with SAP S/4HANA. And a big reason for that is because they had a big named system integrator that, they outsourced all of that to. And you could argue, was that the integrator's fault or was that their fault, right? It depends on who you ask. And it depends on, legally now that they're in litigation, how the law is going to interpret that. And I think that is going to be a big consideration when picking an implementation partner, in knowing that you are going to have to be heavily involved in these types of processes. So definitely a good question there. Let's see. Okay, so before we move on from the internal team, I want to just like do some clarifying points around the internal team. So you cannot, especially if you're a leader, pretend that this team has unlimited time, especially the core team, right? This is a full-time job if you're doing an enterprise level implementation. You can backfill those, right? But you have to be aware of that. Not every organization is going to be able to say, like, I'm going to be able to do this full time. Ideally, right, we'd have 4 to 6 people dedicated to an enterprise level implementation full time, right? That would be the ideal scenario, but we have to live in reality. So if you have 20 hours, average is a strong way to do that, and some normal work. But ideally, you would, step as a leader and be like, "Hey, we're going to invest in this." Otherwise, we're going to get things like extended timelines, which is rescoping, right? Most big vendors and system integrators are going to make the most money in those rescopes or those reworks because they need to go back to the original contract that they won you with, right? And put all of these different things. Oh, your implementation was supposed to take 12 months. Well, now it's going to take 18 months. So we have to rescope that because your team is not working on it full time, right? Which is okay. You just have to be aware of those types of things. And then a lot of times this can lead to like really fragmented project ownership because they're working on different things at different times. So I would say ideally you'd have that project management team of 4 people that this is their full-time job. And it's something that's very used to. It's normal in the business to have this type of kind of fragmented space. But again, it's going to be an opening for big vendors to sell you more if you're not buttoned up internally. And really, what breaks the project is pretending that that's not going to be hard, right? A lot of times we're in this weird phase of big billion-dollar marketing machines making us think that technology implementations is like plugging in a microwave. That couldn't be farther from the truth. These are hard projects. Are they great opportunities to learn, to push your teams into problem solving skills, to cross collaborate with departments you have no idea what they do? Absolutely. It's going to make you better on the other side as long as you're saying, you know what, this is going to be a big project that we have over the next year. We need to make sure that we have feedback cycles and we're taking care of each other when we go into these bigger implementations. So that's kind of what I want to give as far as practical guidance. A lot of people want to pick their A team for the core team. Highly recommend that, right? But the A team cannot do 2 jobs, or they're going to get burnt out in your organization, feel taken advantage of, and then you're going to lose them, right? Which obviously we do not want to do. So let's see. I love these questions. Okay, like let's see. What do you do when every key player isn't represented? You don't implement software. So if you don't know who should be in the room, that's totally fine, right? The power of I don't know, no idea. Find some sort of outside advocate to help you set that up, right? That does know who should ideally be in this room. If you're talking about a solution architecture that doesn't have the actual end user of the solution involved in it, why would we even be talking about that, right? That's like a coach talking to a room full of just empty locker rooms without the actual players in the room. Obviously, the players are not going to know what to do in that situation. And the team is not going to win the game or be successful, right? Let's see, these are so good. What does effective governance actually look like once the project is underway? I mean, that's going to totally depend on the project, but I would say, we're going to need sufficient documentation, status updates, cross communication, and then actually looking at, I would say, the invoices from your implementation network. What are you billing for? And those should be attached to deliverables. Ideally, within those contracts, you should attach your business outcomes that you're looking for to when the go live is. You have to remember, and we'll get into system integrators in a minute because I have a lot to say on that. But you have to understand their business model is implementing software, right? That doesn't mean that it's implemented for your organization to your quality standards. It means that it's technically working in your organization, and that is a big misconception when it comes to, are they going to do it specialized for you? Well, to an extent, but you got to make sure that you understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, especially if we're talking about like offshore work. We need to understand that too. Can it be cheaper? Absolutely, right? But you're going to get what you pay for, just like everything, which is not a bad thing, right? It might be a great opportunity for you to save money, but we're going to look at those things for like testing, right? We're not going to offshore project management that needs to be in the room. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. So definitely pop your questions in there. And let's see, let's do one more and then I'll go into my next little network. What can leaders do before the implementation when they don't have the fundamental process? Create the fundamental process for sure. I think a good leader, right? A good CIO, CTO is going to say, you know what? We've never done an ERP implementation with this group of people. So we're going to get someone that's not trying to sell us software, that's not trying to, sell us implementation services, to come in and just do an assessment, right? To see like, where are we at? And while they do that, because they're, the subject matter experts, I'm going to come over and see like, what are people really struggling with? Usually, when you're looking at a system change of that level, it's, the ugly elephant in the room that is staring at you of what people have a pain point. We cannot process our financials. Huge issue, obviously, right? And so those are going to build out what system is going to be right for you. I will say a lot of people don't want to talk about their current processes because they're boring and painful and they trigger people. And it's a big consideration that you absolutely have to know where you're starting in order to get where you're going. Same sort of, race finish line type of analogy. If you don't know where the starting line is, how do you know when you're done, right? And that is a piece of this type of just hard work that goes into making a good, healthy business, is having an understanding of those processes. I was at a business dinner last night with a bunch of very impressive executive women, and one of them said, the processes set you free. Once you have those fundamental processes in place, you can build upon those. You can build upon that strong, concrete foundation, right? So great questions. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So let's go into the system integrator role, right? So a lot of people don't understand this role because it's confusing. Who's the vendor? Who's the system integrator? And sometimes they're the same person, right? Depending on what you're looking at. So a system integrator, we'll call them SIs for this conversation because that's typically what they're called in the industry. So I want you to be able to speak that language. So SIs build and configure software, right? They configure the software to fit your needs, your requirements. Their job, I can't be more clear on this, is technical delivery, not optimization, right? Does the system technically work? Yes or no? Yes, then their job is done. It's on you to make sure that adoption happens, optimization happens, all of those different things. They always want to believe that their timeline is achievable. It is not in their best interest to say, oh, yeah, you can't implement that in 6 months. There's no way you're doing that. They're going to say, absolutely. And then realize, once they get down the road, this is a 12-month implementation. That's when we start to see the change orders come through, right? Multi millions of change orders come through, right? So what they really don't tell you early in this process is that it's their business model, right? To implement software as fast as they can and go on to the next implementation, right? They are not in charge of forecasting your internal capabilities or your internal failures, right? You need to have that core team, that steering committee, all of those different requirements done before the SI even comes into the conversation. And that's a big consideration on this. A lot of times they're going to rescope those broken areas, and that's going to be the most expensive part of SIs, right? They're going to be rescoping to fix issues and failures. You have to remember that their integration into your business is technically scoped. Does the technical system work? Yes or no? And that's all they're in charge of. I think there's something to be said. I know the multis, right? um, there's something to be said for understanding the roles of tier two versus tier one system integrators. So when we're talking about tier one system integrators, those types of businesses are going to do a lot of different things in their business models. We're talking about Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, and then a lot of those offshore, Infosys, and those types of businesses. You have to know that when you get on the phone with those people or you have someone involved in your organization, there is someone from their side totally in charge of just selling you more product, whether that be CPA services, managed services, custom integrations that they built and you're now tied to them for the rest of the life cycle of this integration. Those where we see a lot of clients miss. We're going through a lot of that right now with our current clients, right? That it's a battle, right? A lot of the organizations that we work with have a very good tier two system integrator that's industry specific, that's system specific, and has fought for their business, right? I love a good tier two system integrator because they're there to get down into the trenches with the client to really be and show up as a partner. But there is a larger system integrator that's constantly inserting themselves into that executive conversation, constantly, right? Saying, we have the name brand, we have the size, we are going to cost less, which it's like maybe the initial contract will cost less. The other people are being all in and thoughtful about that. And these people are just trying to get a foot in the door deal so they can rescope and charge you more. And a lot of that we can tell by timelines, right? System integrator tier two takes your calls. System integrator tier one, you are a small fish in a large pond. They can talk to you maybe next Tuesday, right? And so you have to know that you're on their timeline. Again, does that mean they're terrible people? Absolutely not. You, as the business, need to understand their business model. And they're not going to be the only vendor involved, right? The average business, an SAP sized ecosystem, has over 300 integrations, right? Those are 300 different systems that this core level is going to have to integrate with. So that's just an understanding of that. They may say, especially on paper, that they have your best interest in mind. I am sure they do for their job, right? But they are not in charge of how you leverage the software internally with your organization. They have an agenda, just as the vendor does. So critical you understand that, right? In order to be set up for success. So let's get to these questions. Nothing like, let's see. Nothing like go live week to build team bonding. Absolutely. I mean, in the middle of the night there, in on those calls, and a lot of times if you're working with an offshore system integrator, which a lot of people are really into right now because they're much less expensive, is the fact that you're going to be on the phone in the middle of the night. Maybe that's cool with you, maybe it's not, right? Like it's just a consideration when you're going through these different things. What do you think is the biggest difference between a tier one and a tier two integrator? I would say support is just the biggest difference. If you're, Exxon Mobil, obviously you're going to have on speed dial. It's your Fortune 50 company, a Fortune 5, Fortune 1 company. You're going to already have relationships probably from an audit perspective with bigger vendors that are just going to be like, hey, no problem. We do this too, right? We already have we're already through procurement. We already have our contracts done. It'll be easy. We'll just shift over there. We already have an existing relationship. Again, that might be a great option for you. I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying remember that do you really want the same people implementing your technology as doing your financial work? I don't know. They can see all of your financial information. They know how much money you have. If you don't think that's a conflict of interest, good for you. For my clients, I would prefer that they stay in their lane and they do the technical implementation without getting distracted by anyone else. I'd rather have a specialist in there. If I break my leg, I would rather see an orthopedic surgeon than a brain surgeon, right? Does that mean the brain surgeon isn't able to do a great job and an excellent surgeon? Absolutely not. It just means that they don't specialize in bones, right? And if you've ever like been in that, the neurosurgeon is going to be the first one to tell you, I don't do that, right? But are they still a doctor? Yes, technically they are. Can they still perform surgery on you? Yes, technically they can, right? But is it a good idea? Probably not, right? You get what you pay for and that quality service. I think another big thing of tier one versus tier two is are you choosing a tier two system or are you choosing a tier one system, right? So if you're going with an SAP or Oracle, you're probably going to have to work with one of those tier one vendors. And maybe you should at that level of that implementation. If you're choosing a tier two system, an IFS, an Epicor, an Infor, another one, those tier two vendors are going to be a great opportunity for you to have those localized relationships, especially if something were to go wrong. I want someone in my office from your team sitting there right next to me, right? Not someone I'm talking to in the middle of the night. So that is just, more of an insurance policy to make sure that your implementation network is right there. If I break my leg, do I want to, talk to a doctor across the world? Not really. No, I would like someone that can see my leg, that I can take them and point towards when it hurts and then have that in-person relationship, right? So, very good questions there. Let's see. What is the level of transparency organizations expect from their system integrator? I think their expectation is these people are, the experts, and I'm just going to let them do whatever they do because I don't know how to do that, right? I don't know how to install plumbing in my house, right? So I'm just going to let the plumber do whatever they do, even though do they know that, my shower is in the bathroom and my sink is in the kitchen? I don't really know, right? I hope so. But no, that's not what we want to have as far as expectations for these. Because again, their business models sell you more things or to extend your timeline or to get out of there as fast as possible, go live and go from there, right? Into their next implementation. That's their revenue stream. When it comes to levels of transparency, the dogs are going to bark, sorry. Hold on just a second. Okay, it's their Chewy dog food delivery, so they're deeply passionate about what's happening now. Sorry about that. So level of transparency, I think, is the biggest piece is what to expect in billing, right? So I think a lot of times invoicing, especially from bigger consulting firms, bigger system integrators that are just putting like warm bodies on your project. Please stop fighting behind me. Are just going to bill you for existing. And that's a big problem. You should be able to have transparent billing, and it shouldn't be like implementation research on the line item. Like, what are they doing, and why are they billing $200 an hour for it? That is your right to know. And if they're not willing to tell you that, I feel like that's weird, right? Like, what do you mean? Am I going to go to the grocery store and just pick up a bag of groceries and not allowed to know what I bought in there? No, that's crazy, right? And I think a lot of people fall into like, well, this is just the way it is. And it's like, but this is my business. This is my budget. And so what am I going to be experiencing from that? So that's just a level of transparency. I think the reason that we do, and I do a lot of this content, both on LinkedIn and TikTok, is because I think that you have the right to know what you should deserve from these different partners, just like you do in any sort of business relationship, should know what you deserve, right? And that's a big piece, is they gatekeep this type of access, right? They really try and make sure that they profit off of your confusion as a business. And being able to know what a system integrator does and have someone that's not involved in that conversation whatsoever just give you kind of those red flags, I think is wildly important and misrepresented in our industry. That's why we see that 70%, 80% of implementations fail, because people don't know what to expect. It's like, deciding you're going to be on a fitness journey and going into the gym and all of a sudden throwing crazy barbells of weight around. And you're like, this sucks. I hate this because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm overwhelmed. I'm confused. I don't know how this is supposed to be successful for me, my fitness level, my body, that type of thing. And you need a plan in place, and you need someone who's going to walk you through that. That's not constantly trying to sell you more things, right? Let's see. Let's do one more, and then I'll go on to my next role here. Role number 4. I know you've just waited on bated breath over here. Looking back at your experience, what patterns show up in implementations where accountability was strong from start to finish? First of all, I always like to say that the CIO and the COO friends, right? They are working together to ensure that the business and IT are able to do this implementation together. So that's a core one, right? That the CEO is engaged and the board is supportive, right? We've got that executive alignment. If you don't have executive alignment, if you don't have collaboration between the CIO, CTO, CDO, whatever, right, and the operations team, you might as well don't waste your time, right? Don't waste your time on an implementation, especially if you're trying to do a big one. So that's the first step. The second step is they have their own plan, not a plan that their legacy vendor built for them, not a plan that their accounting firm built for them, right? Their audit firm. A plan that they built with their technology department for the technology that they want, right? And that level is going to be that accountability piece. And then this leads nicely into kind of my next role, which is role 4, which is the advocate. And so the advocate looks a variety of different things. So we can kind of talk about that. But every single one of these implementations that I've seen have an advocate. I mean, it's important to understand I am the advocate. Our teams are the advocate. So I'm biased in that. Would love to know what the rest of the community thinks on what they've seen as far as where accountability was strong. I might actually post that question on my LinkedIn as well and see if we can get other people. Because as I always say, it doesn't matter what I say. It matters what's best for your business. And the goal of these conversations is to show there's no one right way. There's definitely a wrong way to do things, but your business, again, is as unique as your DNA. You need to have a plan that specializes in you, not just one person that said, oh, yeah, I've done that for this industry, and you'll be just like your industry partners. Like, well, I'm not just like my industry partner. I would be my industry partner, right? I have specific features. I have specific functionalities that I want to be able to have in my technology stack. In 2026, the technology stack is very unique. We used to have like a monolithic stack that was pretty much the same for each manufacturing business. Now that's not the case at all, because businesses are so specialized. That's why we see, moving away from these bigger ERP systems. And focused in more of the MES field, the warehouse management field, having something that ties them all together. But again, that's going to need to be your call and that you go through as a discovery process in your business, not with someone trying to sell you all these things. Obviously, they're going to come in and be like, yeah, you can use an ERP as well as an MES module and a warehouse management, because that's money in their pocket, right? So that's a consideration. So let's talk about the advocate, okay? This is often a missing role in the conversation. And it's so critical to have someone who's in industry that experiences that. So vendors sell, right? SIs build, internal teams are often stretched and a little bit confused because not everybody does these all day. What the advocate does is they are contractually in a relationship with only the business, right? Whether they're building, like we do a lot, custom AI agents to go along with their enterprise software or anything like that, they are absolutely tied to the KPIs that make your business successful. 80% adoption rate, right? Like whatever that is for you, that's what this person is going to be there. It doesn't matter how long it takes, right? They need to be there to ensure that you are achieving your goals. They also need to have experience in managing these different vendors with SIs, with the actual vendor that's selling you the software, with the adjacent vendors involved, secondary vendors in that conversation. Who's are you going to integrate with Salesforce? Are you going to, do you have Workday that you need to consider? All of these different pieces. Where is your data? What is your cloud architecture? Is your data secure with this new system? All of those different considerations. So they need to monitor staffing and capacity, right? They need to ensure that they can report up to the management team, like, hey, the core team's doing okay, or hey, we need some help down here and some support. Um, they need to call out those scope creeps or those timeline drifts before they happen, so that they can kind of call out like, we're getting a little silly over here, SI partner or something like that. We need to tighten this up. My partner here is not going to spend an additional $40,000 with you just because you weren't able to complete this on time. I understand that you only had so many hours, but this is what you promised to deliver and we're going to hold you to that, right? Kind of going in playing good cop, bad cop. So the organization doesn't have to be like, should we have thought that they were actually going to deliver this or they were going to stop working because they are at hours? I'm confused, which is honestly confusing. So they need to read the contracts. We always joke internally, like whomever gets to read the contracts, that's going to be a fun week for whomever, because you need to read every single word, right? We had a client that was actually working with their legacy vendor to update their license. Sometimes we don't always do new software. Sometimes our legacy software can make it work, or we're going to evaluate that too. The legacy software, for some reason, decided that they were going to say, oh, well, it's going to be a 40% maintenance on these new license. And we were like, what? That sounds weird. Went back into the contract. Buried in there was you cannot increase maintenance fees more than 6% year over year, right? That saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's not fun. And it's a very time consuming, grueling job, but you absolutely have to do that. So they need to understand those contracts, scope, consequences, really, right? Rescope, budget. And then they also help dial down internal expectations. A lot of times when we go into an implementation, unfortunately, we are called when something is bad, right? When they're like, okay, we are fighting and we have a problem. It's kind of like lawyers, like you only call them when you have to, right? And that is absolutely where we come in to this conversation. So, what we need to do, right, is turn down the rhetoric, understand that everyone has a job, and start to heal those relationships, because it's going to be much more expensive for the client to ditch that software, to fail the implementation, to scrap it and start over. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's what you need to do. But most of the time, we're going to take a hard look of like, can we fix this? Can we heal this relationship? What do we need to do to make sure that we're getting everyone marching in the same direction? So this especially helps if you have less time as an internal team. That conversation about 20 hours a week, right? You've got someone that you've paid to be in your corner to say like, hey, go out and get them if they're not doing what they do. And this is why those one-stop shops, right? Those bigger tier one integrators create a huge risk for the business because they're not only selling software, they're implementing the software, they're managing the vendors, and then you're managing a team. And this black hole starts to emerge in the project where information disappears. You lose that visibility that we talked about, that transparency. Problems surface late, right? It's not in their best interest to be like, hey, man, this implementation's a dumpster fire. It's going to take you 14 months instead of 6 months, right? That's not in their best interest. So the fixes then get expensive because you only have one person involved in that, right? It's a dictatorship when it comes to project management. Whatever they say goes because you don't even know what's happening. They're overseeing that. It's too much power. And in that conversation, the client I talked about before that is going through this SI selection right now, we always encourage them to let the system integrator do their thing, right? They're building the software, they're configuring them. Don't distract them with procurement, project management, steering committee politics, and then upselling, all of these different things. We got to focus on what matters, especially like for a client like this that is like over hell or high water will our ERP system be implemented in 6 months. We absolutely are implementing in 6 months. We're over here like, your business, you can do whatever you want and you can implement in 6 months. That's totally fine. You can implement in 8 months. You can do whatever. You just have to know what is possible in 6 months and be aware of that. You can't be lied to by these people and be like, yeah, no problem, 6 months. We can do it. And then we get to month 5 and they're like, well, we don't have enough hours to so and so. And then we get into, bad, dire straits. Let's do some questions before I go into my final lucky number 5. Let's see. What's the cost of underestimating data mapping and validation? I mean, it depends on what we're talking about, right? Like a lot of times what people think especially when they're moving to the cloud, is that they're moving their legacy system just literally over to another computer. Can you do that lift and shift? For sure. But will it be the same sort of disaster that you had with your legacy system? Yes. Is data mapping and validation easy? No. It's tedious work, right? Can you get help with it? Absolutely. But it's going to be the fuel to your, race car. Do you put unleaded fuel in a race car? Maybe, right? Is it going to run as well as it would on premium fuel? No, right? So that's how you have to kind of think about it, and really understand that. I think the other underestimated cost is like, especially in a heavily compliant industry, like we work in metals, right? If that muffin tin had a speck of metal in the muffin in Ireland, we have to know where it came from, probably in Europe, but maybe in the States, maybe Canada, maybe all kinds of different places. They have to have traceability for 30 years in the aluminum industry. And that is incredibly important. You cannot just turn off your legacy system that has that data. You have to maintain it and be able to access it. So really understanding that again, right? Is your SI super concerned about that? No, right? They don't really care if you have healthy data. That's your issue, right? That's your problem. Do they understand if the data works with the current system? That's their only concern in that, right? So I'm all about reading every content. Be careful what you wish for, my friend, right? Data cleanup also is a big thing. So how do you maintain visibility in a large implementation? I think you have that strong project manager, and that's really going to start, right? And then that advocate working alongside that project manager. The advocate could be internal, right? Too. It's very difficult to find that specialized skill set, which you might have to find anyway, right? Like I talked to a lot of people that are going through ECC to S4HANA, If you don't have someone that knows S/4HANA on your IT team, you're going to need to start resourcing those. Do you need to have them today? So you hire, anyone off the street? Absolutely not. But you're going to need those resources internally, right? And if you don't have that, you need to find someone that can do that for you without trying to sell you, more SAP products and how they get compensated. Um, which is important to understand for the compensation model of these implementations. A lot of people are compensated on the go live date, right? Does that mean that they're going to like sabotage your implementation? No, but it means we need to understand where the money is coming from, right? We need to follow that trail just so we can be aware, right, of what's going on and make sure that we understand our business relationships and strategic partners. I would also say a big piece of that is the reporting from the partners and who's managing that, organizing it, going over it with a fine tooth comb. What is going on with this billing? What do we need to do? It's just like you would with anything else that you purchase in supply chain or inventory. Do we have all of this inventory? Is every product made it here? Are we counting it? Right? Like, what does that look like? You need to do the same thing with the billing hours. Like, just because it's not physical inventory does not mean it's not capital expense that your budget and company is spending. So that's a big thing. Um, let's see, one more, and then I'm going to finish out with offshoring, which seems to be a very hot topic right now. All right. How does how does data ownership shift after go live? Um, I mean, I think that is a really specific question that depends on what your data looks like. But I think what it does bring up is data ownership, right? Like, what is your data stewardship process, right? Who owns the data? Who's making sure that because we just spent millions of dollars cleaning the data, that we're not going to put a bunch of garbage data back into the new system, right? How do you know that? And who's in charge of that? We need a data owner. We need data stewards. We need someone checking the data, right? We need a master data management plan. If we don't have that, we don't have any business owning cloud software, in my humble opinion, right? So that's a big consideration on these different levels. So it's good that you're even considering that. And then also, who owns your data, right? Like when we go in to build custom rolling agents for aluminum manufacturing companies, we don't want any of their data. Like, that's none of our business, right? What we're doing is building on behalf of them owning their data. We don't store it. We don't own it. We don't even, be able to know what it is. They're putting it in there because it's collaboration. It's not our tool, it's their tool, right? We're just helping them build it, right? The minute people start to own your data, you might as well, again, as I always say, go up to the roof, throw your money off of it, right? It's a better use of your time and headspace than trying to figure out data ownership. I think if you're working with a bigger enterprise client like SAP or anything like that, you need to be absolutely vigilant on when you can access your data. You think that it's your data, you can access it anytime? Absolutely not. They can block it at any point that they want to. So really, again, having that advocate in your corner being like, hey, we need to lock this up, and you're like, I didn't even realize, because why would you, right? And typically business relationships are not to take advantages of other business, or maybe I just live in a world of hopes and dreams, but that's a big consideration there too. So real quick, let's talk about offshoring. A lot of people have questions about, should I offshore part of my implementation? What does that look like? And we've seen a lot of, big failures around that. So I just want to, give you some information on that. So when we choose an SI or resources that are offshore, right? They're inexpensive. You get what you pay for, but that might be an okay thing, right? So when we do something like offshoring, we're not going to offshore our project management, right? We're not going to offshore our implementation strategies. We're not going to offshore our change management strategies. Like, those are parts of the implementations that absolutely need to be done with a partner that is close to you, right? That is in your offices, that is helping you with analysis, assessments. So those strategic pieces absolutely need to be done in-house or with a partner that, again, is local to you, that is going to be in your office every other week, every month, whatever, to make sure that that happens. When it looks like something like testing, does this button work, right? We can absolutely offshore that as long as we're getting visibility and quality work, right? And that's going to be on you to manage in the project governance. We don't offshore ownership. We don't offshore decision making, right? We don't offshore project management. There can be smaller skills, but again, without that specialized person that's done this before, the advocate role, internal or external, it's very difficult to know what's a good investment to offshore and what's not. Because the SI wants you to offshore as much as possible so that they can bill you 200 an hour for someone they're not even paying 2% of that, right? That's just an example I made up. So I don't know if anyone's doing that. Just want to be crystal clear on that, but that's usually how those relationships work. So that is offshoring. And so kind of just to wrap everything up about what we talked about, because this was a big, meaty, hefty conversation. This should be personalized to your business. Your implementation network is supposed to help you, like your LinkedIn network is supposed to help you, right? SaaS or implementations fail when these roles blur, when there's gray area and not everyone's clear about expectations. The clarity and alignment and strategic approach that as a business is going to be much less expensive than the rescue, the rescope, rework, all of those different things. As we talked about, the vendor sells. That is their job. In the demos, you're talking to salespeople, not the people that will be implementing or anything like that. Do you have the option to ask for those people? I always recommend people say, who will actually be in charge of my implementation? They may not know, and that's fair, but they certainly have a director or someone that oversees delivery that can talk to you and make sure that it's a good match, right? The integrator builds. They configure your software for your technical requirements. Do they care if anyone uses your software? Maybe, but not really, right? They're going to move on even if you don't use that. That's on you. That's your responsibility. The internal teams are in charge of operations, right? They're executing all of these different things, especially at larger enterprise software, full-time job. Can't stress that enough. If you're not going to give them full-time hours on that, just be honest with them and monitor it, right? And then the advocate is supposed to be there to be your representation, and they hold you together, right? They advocate for you in these conversations that you might not be clear of or that you might not even be in the room for, right? There's many times that we're prepping system integrators for these calls, and there's been many back and forth of like, we're not waiting until 3 weeks from now for your proposal. So the client didn't even have to know that was going on because it was, something that they invested in someone to support them through. So, if I had to leave you with one thought, I would just remind you, if no one owns the whole implementation network, the software will never fully belong to the business. And I want you to remember that because it's so important that you have ownership over your business systems or you're giving the keys away to your business. So I really appreciate you guys being here today. Just a reminder that we go live on LinkedIn every Friday. If you don't follow me on TikTok, there's very fun lives over there as well that we do 3 times a week, where we do specialized conversations around all things technology strategy, specifically in manufacturing and complex industries. That's my specialty in those conversations and our team's specialty. If you have questions, reach out, start to gain that knowledge. Definitely ask people that you're seeing on LinkedIn what their experience is. Talk to people at industry conference about people who've done this before. The more that you can start building that network, the more successful you're going to be. To have people to call to be like, this feels weird. And they'll be like, it is. No. But they might say that, that's totally normal, but I get why you feel that that's weird. To have that sort of supportive team to make you successful. And that's, my goal in doing this content, taking my time to do it, is giving you access to that information without that 6-figure price tag. So All right, my friends. Well, it's been amazing. I really appreciate your time today, and I will see you next week.